We are live. We are live. We are live. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope that everybody's doing okay this afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us. We will be getting started in about 4 minutes. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon again to you. Welcome to our session this afternoon. Thank you very much for the half hour that you're going to be spending with me. It is going to be a series of short sessions. We just want to keep it focused and keep it as meaningful as possible. Before I get started, let me just run through a few housekeeping points. For persons who may not be able to access on Zoom, if we do ever get up to full capacity, you can let your colleagues know that they can also access it on Facebook as well, on the Angel Z Caglin page, Facebook page. I will be encouraging you to use the chat function on both platforms if you want to post questions and comments. In fact, I'm encouraging you to keep the chat very active, share your comments, your thoughts, your ideas, your questions, keep them going in the chat because this is a learning experience, not just one way, but we will be learning from each other throughout this process. As you know, that's just the way that learning goes. Just to avoid any disturbances, we do have all of our participants on mute, but there will be a short session at the end, a short period at the end of the session where we can engage in some discussion. You can share your thoughts on what we've done, what we've discussed throughout the session. You can share your experiences on anything that we've discussed as well. And this is just an introductory session. So it's really a time for us to kind of get to know some of the background information that we need to get through the next few sessions. As you can see, my little point here underlined, this is a safe learning and sharing space, free from blame, free from judgment. Now we know that a lot is not going, the way we would like it to go, but we really want to keep a positive atmosphere. We do not want to be feeling blamed or assigning blame or judging anyone for any of their ideas that they presented, any of their concerns, any of their questions. All right. As I mentioned, it's going to be a very short session, between 30 and 40 minutes for each of the sessions, which means it would not be possible for us to cover every possible point or idea that we would really like to explore when it comes to writing. I mean, there's just so much that can be said for writing. So I am encouraging you to do some additional reading, do some additional viewing, additional discussions with your colleagues throughout the session. I have a colleague with me who will be posting some additional reading material in the chat. So some links that you can click on, some materials, some pages that you can go on to do some reading. Feel free to explore that. As we're getting started, since the chat is something that you can use, let's just take 30 seconds just to post your name. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Share some of your expectations for these sessions, these 6 sessions, 5-6 sessions. It will really be helpful to me to tailor the upcoming sessions to meet your needs as much as possible. So let's just take about 15 to 30 seconds. Introduce yourself, say well, obviously we will see your name, but your school, the grade that you're teaching, or what are some of your expectations, any other information that you would like to share. I see someone that has asked, will we receive a certificate at the end? I can give you a lovely certificate. I don't know if it will mean anything to you or to the education system, but I can give you a lovely certificate saying that you participated in the session for sure. All right. But let's see some introductions coming through in the chat so that I know everybody is okay using the chat feature. All right, I see Raymond Regis has already posted. Welcome. Shanika Melius from Sufra Infant. Welcome to the session. Rivadori, welcome Rivadori. Choiseul people with Lastic Rosalie Primary. Nice. Special education at RC Infants. Wonderful. I see Miku Primary is also here. So for primary. So we definitely have people from all over. Dame Paulette, grade 1. Welcome, Valin. Super infants. All right, so keep introducing yourself to your peers, and as you do that, and I see some persons coming in as well, as you're doing that, I'm going to just run through just a quick overview of what we'll be doing for the next, well, today and the next 5 days that we're going to have these sessions, just to give you, to highlight the purpose of these sessions that we will be having here. What's the purpose of this series? Well, we really want to discuss the goals of writing. How do we go about teaching writing? How do we trace the writing development and the spelling development of our students? No matter at what level we're talking here, we're talking infant, primary, secondary level. What are some approaches that we can use for the teaching of writing, and how these approaches can be integrated and can support each other? We also want to look at how we can track writing growth. And we want to look at one way that we can do that through writing portfolios. Again, at all levels, we're trying to see how we can apply this across the board from K all the way up to Form 5. We do have students who are still working their way up that ladder of skilled reading and skilled writing. So especially in the area of writing, what are some things that we can do to ensure that we are differentiating our writing instruction and we are accommodating students who are still working their way up that skill ladder? We will look at a few of the tools that can be used during the teaching of writing, both those that can be used by students and those that can be used by you as educators. And of course, we want to ensure that we share best practices, share innovations in the teaching of writing. All right, that last part there is really for you. So share in the chat what you've tried. And when you get an opportunity to share during our discussion period at the end of the sessions, share. If you realize there's an upcoming session that you have some experience in, I've tried this, it's worked for me and my students, there were some challenges, feel free to contact me and say, I'd like to feature in one of the upcoming sessions, sharing with my fellow colleagues some of the areas where I've had some success in teaching writing. Okay, that being said, here's just a snapshot of some of the sessions. Please note that as we, from session to session, I'll be making every effort to improve and tailor a bit more. So by the time I get some feedback from you after this session, I can see, okay, what do I need to do to tailor the next session to your needs? So feel free to, give that feedback whenever it's solicited. So for this session is really going to be an introductory session. We're going to look at what is reading, what are the stages, how is writing connected to spelling development, how is writing connected to reading, what are some of the challenges that we have of teaching writing, and that's something that I really want to hear from you. I've heard some of it, but here's an opportunity for you to really share what those challenges are. And we can see how, not just in this session, but how your colleagues are also going to help you meet some of those challenges, because I know that you've had them and you've overcome some of them as well. In the next session, we'll be looking at the writing workshop, or the writer's workshop. Some of you may be familiar with it. You may have tried it. What exactly is it? What's the format for this writer's workshop? What are some of the benefits? What are some of the challenges? And this is where I want to hear from anyone who has actually tried it out in their classroom and they've had some success, they've had challenges, they tried it, maybe they didn't have total success, but they really want to have success in this area. What are some pieces of advice that maybe you can give your peers? We're also going to look at the 6+ traits of writing. And especially in that session, we want to look at the role of mini lessons in teaching. Now, of course, we're going to be looking at these things in specific sessions, but I want you to keep in mind that they can most likely be used across the teaching of writing, all of the approaches that you use for the teaching of writing. Then we're going to look at something that a lot of us know about, the writing process. So if you've been teaching for a while, you may be very familiar with the writing process. If you're new, you may have some information or very little, but here's an opportunity to see the writing process in a different light and see how the writing process, the writing traits, and the writer's workshop can be integrated in your teaching of of writing to your students. All right. And you notice, see here, managing expectations. You know, when we in these sessions and we talk about what can happen, it sounds all beautiful and starry, but we want to make sure that we manage expectations, know what to expect so that we're not disappointed when we have those challenges. We also want to talk about how to track students' writing progress. And in that session, we will look at how we differentiate and accommodate for all of our different types of writers, how we go about developing a writing portfolio in collaboration with our students, and what are some of the tools that we use for teaching writing, assessing writing, etc. And for our final session, we will see how we can put all of this together to plan a writing lesson for your class, whether you're at the infant level, at the primary level, or at the secondary level. So again, if you know you have any experience in any of these areas and you know you really like to share, contact me, let me know. All right. So we go on to our first session, which is introducing writing. What are we going to be looking at in this session? What is writing? What are some of the stages of writing development? What's the reading-writing connection and how we can really maximize that? And what are some of the realities when it comes to the teaching of writing? So let's dive right in. What is writing? Now, as I ask this question, and I've been saying the word writing over and over, I'm sure there are some words and phrases that have been coming to your mind. Could you just post in the chat for me some of the words and phrases that came to mind in answer to this question? What is writing? And I'm going to pause a bit to see what it is you share with us in the chat. What in your mind is writing? I see tracing, following patterns. Nice. Expressing ideas. Sentences, expression. Communicating in written forms, expressing ideas creatively. I see more expressing ideas, using your imagination. Composing text. A skill. Coherent words on paper and composing text. Okay, keep sharing. And once you've shared, I mean, you can share more than once. I want you to go back and read some of the ideas that your colleagues have posted as well. I see a lot about expressing. I see some things about communicating. I see about, ideas. I see some people specify that, there are words involved and there's a text. Someone has said that it's a skill. There's the idea of coherence. So as you think about yourself as a teacher and when you're teaching your students to write, these are the things that you're asking your students to do. In other words, what you're putting in the chat there for us. We're asking them to be expressive, to share their thoughts, to use their imagination, to develop a skill, to compose, right? Communicating thoughts and ideas. Now, what I did was I went online and I thought, let me see what some professionals are saying that writing is, and see if any of those expressions, descriptions, definitions, whether they match up to what you have in your own head about writing as well. So one person said, visually transmitted symbolic activity. I feel like each word is just packed with some meaning here. Visually transmitted symbolic activity. Another said, a process of learning to think about one's own thinking. Doesn't seem like there's anything about recording here, right? Or text. A process of learning to think about one's own thinking. Another said, regarding this visually transmitted symbolic activity, and I found this really interesting, that this could take 4 forms: a verbal form, which would be written words, mathematical, which would be numbers and equations, visual, which would be drawings, and mechanical. And I found this one interesting in the form of physical models. Now, what these authors were saying is that in every occupation, there's writing happening. But for someone like an engineer who may be creating a physical model, that's writing in his or her occupation, right? For an architect, drawing is their form of writing, right? And so on in physics, in the math, in the science field, it may be numbers and equations. That is what they write. I found that particularly interesting. Britannica says it's a form of human communication by means of a set of visible marks that are related by convention or by agreement to some particular structural level of language. Visible marks related by convention to a specific structural level of language. And Thought Co said, writing is a system of graphic symbols that can be used to convey meaning. So let's look at some of the words in bold here. Visible marks, symbols, meaning, symbolic, verbal, mathematical, visual, mechanical. I think I should have even highlighted here learning and thinking, right? So if these are the ideas connected, and I think in a lot of ways they reflect what you've also considered writing, which is, expressing your thoughts, communicating ideas, using your imagination, being expressive, composing, all of these. I think they're in line. Now, if we're saying that is what writing is, the act of writing or the process of writing, what exactly counts as writing or text, right? And we can think about it in two ways. Think about in your classroom. What are some ways that you have your students at the infant level, primary level, or even secondary level? If we're saying that writing is about a visual representation of ideas, what are the types of writing happening in your classroom? What are the various ways you have students representing their ideas, right? And we can imagine these would be drawings, illustrations, words, phrases, lines, for example, in poetry, sentences, right? Now, a lot of the times when we as educators think of writing, we always think about academic writing. We think about our students filling paper with lines of text, with sentences, paragraphs, right? Now think outside of the classroom. What are some of the forms of writing that we can count as visual representation of ideas? Let's see. We drive, we see signs on the road, we know what they mean. We see certain logos, we can identify the restaurants and the stores immediately, can't we? Right? We read text messages on our phones, we read emails. When we need information online, we go to blog posts, or if we go to YouTube, we read the captions and they help us see whether the information we're looking for, whether we've been able to locate it. So there are so many different types of writing that happens inside and outside of the classroom. So here's a question, one of the big questions for us to think about if we're saying this is what writing is. As we are designing activities, writing activities for our students, how much are we varying what they can produce in the class? So across a week, a unit, across the term, across the school year, how many different types of writing do we have the students producing? And even within a lesson, how many options are we providing for students for the ways that they can represent their thoughts, right? There are so many different types of writing. It's not possible to list all of it here, especially if we go back to this definition. And I will go back to it again and again, that that this visually transmitted symbolic activity can take 4 different forms, right? So if we really look at it this way, how many different types of writing can we have students possibly doing in the classroom? So that's one of our big questions, one of the big questions that I want you to start pondering. Now, of course, for things like our assessments, I see someone mentioned CPEA in the chat. Now, even with this type of assessment, they're all the same form of writing, and they're all the production of prose, of text. Is it varied in terms of what happens in the real world in terms of drawing and equations and numbers and even models? I mean, I just love this idea of a form of writing being creating models, right? And isn't it true that for a student, for a learner to be able to create a model, they really need to understand a text, they need to understand ideas to be able to create that model? So that's one big question to keep in mind, that you can start, thinking about the next day, the next lesson, what it is can be done differently. So we've spoken about what writing is. There are actually stages of writing development, and in a lot of ways, they're connected to the stages of spelling development. Now, this is important to mention because as we're going into discussing what these stages are, seeing some examples, I want us to consider, have we been reasonable in the past about what we expect our children, our students to do at the infant level, at the primary level, and even at the lower secondary level in terms of writing and spelling, okay? So as we're going through that, ask yourself, have we been reasonable in our expectations of our students? Now, we can spend a lot of time discussing each of the stages. We will not do that, but there will be some nice links being posted in the chat for you. I suggest you copy them and you can check them out later if you really want to read in detail what these stages are. But generally, you will find that there are about 4 or 5 stages being mentioned for writing development. And it would start as early as a baby can hold an implement for writing, right? So these are the stages here. Awareness or exploratory stage, emergent or experimenting, transitional or early writing, conventional writing, and proficient writing. Now, we as adults, we would love to think that we are proficient writers, right? But it may be interesting to note what are the general ages and stages that people go through as they write in order to become a proficient writer. And what exactly are the characteristics of a proficient writer versus a conventional writer, all right? And that's something you can answer as you do your own reading as well. But here are some visual representations of a child's writing. And there's some evolution going on here from, let me just zoom in on it a bit, right? You see, there are some scribble stages, right? There's one scribble stage where, if you have any babies at home or you have any babies around you, when they get paper, how do they start writing? Do they go to the top left and they start? No, they will make circles anywhere on the paper, right? And they will turn the page and they'll start writing on a different page. Woe be you if they happen to get a textbook of yours. That is important, right? You will find in the middle of your class or your reading, you will find some evidence that, baby was here. In the second part of the scribbling stage, you will see that they're now doing some left to right progression, right? Now, mind you, these things are not happening spontaneously, out of thin air. It's because they have been seeing writing happening, right? They've been seeing either you're writing, they're seeing other people writing, so they understand that there's a specific direction going on. They may start imitating letters, right? They may start stringing letters together randomly. They may then be grouping letters so that it looks like the words that they're seeing. And they may label pictures. They may caption or label items in the environment. They may use letters to represent entire words. They may use beginning and end letter sounds to represent the entire word. Then they start writing. They start including medial sounds. They use phrases. Then they look at this at 12, whole sentence writing. This is called whole sentence writing, but do you notice the spelling? Do you notice the punctuation? All of it is not fully developed, but this child understands the concept of whole sentence writing, right? These are stages that children will go through as they're writing. And I'm sure that for those of you, especially at maybe the infant and the early grade levels, you're already thinking about why it is that children are beginning to use beginning letter sounds and beginning and ending letter sounds when they're writing words. What does it tell you about their reading development as well? Now, I know you may be wondering, well, if this is what they're doing, what are the various ages, right? I found another one here, and I put right next to it one of the representations of spelling development. Now you will find two documents. If you do a search on the stages of spelling development, you'll find this one, which was developed early, maybe in the 1980s, and you'll find another that was developed by the writers of this text, Words Their Way. I think I think you may either have a copy of this at your school or you can access a copy, right? You can even ask the coach in your district for some information on this if your school does not have a copy. And right on the inside page, they actually have the stages that you will see in a future slide. But look at some of the stages that I mentioned here, right? The scribble stage, the symbolic stage, and look at the visual demonstrations of those stages, right? And that's generally before children get into formal schooling. And as they get into formal schooling and they learn about letters, the alphabetic principle is being developed, the alphabet knowledge is being developed, you will see the emergence of letters and letters being stringed together and all of that. Now look at what transitional writing is, and then look at what fluent writing is. Now, according to this document, there's a beginning phrase stage, or a sentence stage, and then there's a stage where they're using the 6 traits of writing, right? And this is being called the fluent stage, but look at the visual representation of it. So it really is saying, look at the characteristics of what children can do already, right? As opposed to what we're expecting them to do compared to what we can do. And if you look at some of the spelling development stages, you will see the pre-communicative, which is about writing the random letters. They're not necessarily matching sounds, they're just writing out letters. All the way down to the correct or automatic stage, where they have a good grasp of spelling conventions. Notice when they have that relatively good grasp. They did not say excellent, perfect, a good grasp. Ages 11 onwards, okay? That's what grade level again? Grade 5, grade 6? Yes, transitional, all right? Now, I have found, because I've spoken quite a bit here, I found a really nice video that explains the 5 stages as outlined in the Words Their Way book. So I'm going to play this video for you. It's very short. It's maybe about 2 to 3 minutes, and see if, as they highlight the descriptions of each stage, if you can identify students like that in your class, whether it's the infant, primary, or secondary level. Okay? So I think you got quite a bit of information in that short time, right? Quite a bit of information on the stages. And I don't know if you caught the ages associated with a lot of these stages, but here they are. You notice that final stage, students age 10 plus, grades 5 to grades 12. 12 is, what we'd call A level, right? So at that stage, the students or the children are still learning, right? I found this really nice representation, again, adapted from Words Their Way. It's in the text that already gives you some examples of what students might be doing at each stage and activities that you can do to help students at each of those stages, right? Now, why am I sharing all of this? It's not to tell you, well, if your student is aged 8, then they should be at this stage. And if they're not at this stage, they have a problem. No. How we want to use this information is always start with the student. Based on how my student writes, what information can I get from the child's writing to tell me what he or she can already do? And now that I know what he or she can do, I can now make a decision on what I need to do with the student to help them move to another stage of writing development, right? We may find that even for students at the lower secondary level, especially students who are working their way up to skilled reading, there's a need for some developmental work in writing and spelling, all right? And we'll come to that next when we talk about the reading and writing connection. But you will find even at the secondary level, especially at the lower secondary level, students will still need assistance. And it's not what we're seeing for syllables and affixes stage and derivational stages. We're seeing ages 8 to 18, grades 3 to grade 8. That's like Form 3, right? Form 2, Form 3. Derivational, same thing, right? So this little column here on ways to help actually shares some really interesting activities that you can do, right? I just want to highlight a couple of them that we may not even have been thinking of, but using word sorts and word hunts to study particular aspects of words like affixation, tenses, consonant doubling, right? For this derivational stage, which would be really good for our students in the upper primary and lower secondary, examining spelling and meaning connections, looking at word bases, what we call roots, looking at word origins. So looking if the word is of Latin origin, what are the usual meanings for words that are of Latin origin or Greek origin, right? All of this can help students understand the meaning. However, it also helps them with their spelling, because if they can determine the origin of words, that it's Latin, then it's usually spelled in a particular pattern. If it's Greek, it's usually spelled in a particular pattern, right? All of these things will help their spelling development, and we can see why the writing is so much connected with the spelling, right? So this, you will have this as well, so you can always refer to it. And again, I mean, these things are online, you do a bit of searching. So the other area that I want to look at, so we've looked at what writing is, we've looked at the stages of writing development, how it's connected to spelling. But now I want to look at the reading-writing connection, right? And for us to be able to highlight that, even though we're saying there's a reading-writing connection, we have to understand that all of the language skills are connected. If you have a young child at home, a baby, you can think about how this child goes about learning language, right? The first thing that a child does is listens to the sounds. And then over time, this baby realizes sounds are associated with particular things or people or places or ideas, right? When my mother or my aunt or my neighbor makes a particular sound, they're usually referring to something, right? It means something. And then when the child begins to speak, he or she begins to imitate those same sounds. Why? So that they can access those people, those places, I want water, right? Those things or whatever, or to communicate some idea about these things, How does reading happen? Well, reading happens when the child realizes that the sounds, those sounds that represent ideas, they can actually be represented in a graphic form. Interesting. There's a particular pattern, right? I can't just scribble, but if I put it in a particular pattern, it actually means something that I usually hear and that I usually see, right? And then writing, which is now imitating those same graphic patterns that I'm seeing. And if I do that well, I can actually encode some ideas in there that someone, when they look at it, can decode and they can get meaning from it. And then the child goes back to reading his or her own writing. Why? Because they want to make sure that what they've encoded, what they've recorded there, can actually be decoded by someone, and that when they decode it, the correct ideas are being transmitted. So we can see the connection between reading, which involves decoding, breaking down, analyzing, and the writing, which involves encoding or recording, if you want to put it that way. So let's explore a little more about those connections between readers and writers. And this is something that you may know. When students read, they realize or they understand or they are helped to understand explicitly by their teachers that there are particular structures in writing, right? There are different types of sentences, there are different types of paragraphs, there are different types of ideas that are expressed in paragraphs, there are narratives or stories, there are, descriptive, there are those texts that just give me information. They learn about the structure through reading, right? And again, none of these things are automatic. These things are being taught explicitly by you as teachers in the classroom. As they read, they also gain vocabulary that they will in turn use in their writing. So when you come across words as they read, you play with the sound. You discuss the meaning. You discuss whether this has one specific meaning or whether it can have different meanings in different contexts, right? You discuss the structure, how the word is created. And then after you do all of this, sometimes you put it up on a word wall in your class and you encourage students that as they're writing, are there words there that we can now use in our writing? Vocabulary is very important even in the content areas, because how else will they use the right expressions when they're talking about balancing an equation, when they're talking about the nitrogen cycle, when they're talking about how to start a small business, right? Or any other concept that they're discussing, the vocabulary comes from the reading. The reading also provides them with the ideas and information that they need to write, right? So as they read, you're also discussing the ideas. And the students are connecting these ideas to ideas you already have in their brains, or even if they don't have it, they're now creating new schema there that will later be connected to something else. And that is information that they could later use for writing. So ideas in terms of, let's say they've read a narrative, right? There are events there that they can relate to, or new events that they find fascinating that they may later decide to incorporate into their own stories, take it in a different direction, expand on it, whatever the case may be. And then they also read informational text, which gives them definitions and advantages and pros and cons and solutions, etc. And they will take pieces of information from different texts and synthesize it so that they can express their own ideas, their own views, their own evaluations on things. And interestingly, of course, reading will allow for exploring phonemic awareness, which, as we've already established, is necessary for spelling, right? As they play with the sounds in words, when they're writing now, anytime you write, for us, most of us, it's become automatic. But when we come to a word usually that we don't use very often, isn't it true that we have to slow down a bit and pause and sometimes sound out the word before we start writing it? Because now we understand that certain letters can produce certain sounds in certain situations. Thank you, English language, right? Just cannot be straightforward. And there are certain combinations of letters that produce certain sounds, again, under certain circumstances, right? And as you read, especially when students are read to by a skilled reader, by a skilled and expressive reader, they grasp all of these things. Of course, as a writer, you become a better reader. You have to read over your text, don't you? When you're writing, you want to ensure that the same excitement you get from reading a text, the same satisfaction that you get, your readers get that as well. We mentioned the phonemic awareness and the phonetic knowledge. We understand why. And of course, it helps readers to identify structure. In order to be a good writer, you have to structure your information in a way that your readers will be interested in reading it. And not just that, that they will be able to get your ideas as quickly and as easily as possible, right? There's a great article from the International Literacy Association. It's a research advisory, teaching writing to improve reading skills. It's very good reading. We're going to put that link in the chat for you. Maybe it's there already. It's good material for your professional development. So if you have a group who, you get together with other colleagues to discuss, or it's something that as a school, you may decide to share with your colleagues at the school and say, let's discuss this and see how many of these ideas we would want to try out. I would recommend that as a good source of reading. But let's say, wow, it's already 5:43. Okay, so we're getting there. What are the implications if we're saying that there is a connection between reading and writing? What should you now be doing in the class? You should definitely have the students reading different types of texts, right? Not just stories at grade K, grade 1, grade 2, but informational texts as well. You need all of your students reading texts that are informational. You need them reading text that has a combination of images and words. You need them reading text that has multimedia in it and being able to understand the relationship between the multimedia diagrams, photographs, images, tables, charts, and how they relate to the text itself. You want them reading graphic text so that they can understand the different ways that ideas can be expressed. You want them listening to the reading of text. So you have to be a good reader, a skilled reader, and you have to demonstrate those skills to them. That is how their phonemic awareness is developed at all levels, including secondary levels. And I want someone to tell me that secondary students don't want you to read to them. They love when you read to them. It doesn't matter what age they are, right? You want to be exploring words. You want to explore the sounds in the words, the basis of the words, the inflections, affixes, how the word can, word analysis, explore everything about a word. You also want to explore meanings. Some words have multiple meanings. The words have a denotative or literal meaning and a connotative meaning. So what's the connotation? Is it negative? Is it positive? What are some ideas or images that come to mind when you hear that word? Paradise, right? That's a positive connotation. When you hear the word stench, which literally means a smell, that's a negative connotation. Why? Right? Discussing all of these meanings in words. Discussing the ideas, because that is how you either activate or build students' background knowledge. And if they don't have that background knowledge, they can't write. And of course, as your students read, you want to point out structures, words, sentence, paragraph, text. You want to point out the different features and structures in text, okay? As the students are writing, you want them to imitate patterns that they find in text. So when you've read a good book, students may find that the way the writer, structured this sentence, I found it really interesting. It had a particular effect. I think I want to imitate that. The way that this particular paragraph is structured, right? How does it start? The paragraph starts with an example. Well, that's strange, that's weird, but it's effective because when I read the example, I wanted to know what it is they were talking about. So I read on, right? The ways that texts are structured. So good mentor text that students will read and then imitate. You want them to use background knowledge, which means you have to activate that. And as we do the session on the writing process, we will see why the pre-writing stage is probably the most involved stage in the entire process and the role that background knowledge plays there. You want, as they write, for them to self and peer assess. And we know why. The assessment process means that they must identify what those solid points are, what those strengths are, and what are the areas that they may need to do some further development. You want them to create and combine different types of texts. So you don't want the students just writing prose. You want them to create poems. You can give them formulas. You want them to create text where there's a combination of illustrations or images and words. You want them to insert multimedia into their text as well. And very importantly, you want them to share the texts that they are creating. Writing for a real audience makes a big difference. Okay? Now, we're almost out of time, but I want you to do something for me. We will not pause to do it. I would like you to just, this link is going to be posted in the chat, the Padlet. I want you to just record there for me in that Padlet some of the challenges that you've had while teaching writing. Now, these challenges could be, I don't feel I'm able to teach a specific thing. It could be, there are certain factors in the instructional environment that's making it difficult, or it could be about the students' process for reading, or even their own products that they create. What have been some of your challenges here? But in the meantime, I want to run through just 4 of the realities that we are dealing with in 2022. The first is that we are not a reading society, right? That's not something that when you see us relaxing, we're relaxing with a book in hand. That's not something we do in St. Lucia. Now, clearly, we can't change the world. We can't even change St. Lucia, much less the world. But you have your own little circle of influence. What can you do within that circle? What can you do at your own home? What can you do within your own class to create a community of readers, right? The second is that some children, their only exposure to books is in the classroom. They don't interact with books at home, right? How do you compensate for that in the classroom where your students will be meeting, or at your home where you may have children? Another challenge is that the weight of the curriculum requires that we are very mindful, deliberate, conscious about how we design instructional experiences or learning experiences at the classroom level, right? So the question is, how do you design lessons for your students, right? And on what do you base that decision? What kind of evidence? Do we always just rely on observation? Well, I see so-and-so, or I think so-and-so, or do we have actual evidence from assessments that, when we speak to our HOD or we speak to our principal or our EO, we can say, I got this evidence from my students. We did some informal assessments, or as my students have been writing, I have noticed A, B, C, D, E, F, G. As a result, I realized to get them to the next level, I needed to take care of A, B, C, D. You must have some sound evidence on which to base your instructional decisions in the classroom. So you are well within your right to say, yes, I know at grade 2, they should be able to do so and so, but I'm very much aware that based on their reading, and I have done some reading records, and I've done some assessment of their writing, they aren't able to do this yet because they need this stage to be completed, right? And the final challenge is that the last 2 years have certainly impacted our students' development in all areas. Literacy, numeracy, psychosocial in all ways, right? There's no way for us to go back and turn back the clock. So for, let's say, teachers at grades 1, 2, 3, even 4, you realize now our students did work on alphabet knowledge. Our students did work on phonemic awareness and phonics. They're not reading us as strongly. Come on, even under normal circumstances, they weren't reading at grade level. Right? What can I do? I now need some more help from my colleagues, and there may be things that I can share with my colleagues. We can collaborate to see how we can now work on the areas where students need some more assistance. At grade 3, I'm not used to developing language alphabet knowledge, but I need to do it now. Who am I going to go to for some pointers? That's where my peers come in. That's where my support persons at the district level come in. And that's where I can bring in some of my parents to help me as well. All right. And again, I'm going to look at the Padlet to see some other challenges that you've highlighted and see how, as we go through the other sessions, how we can tie them in and see how we can address some of them. And maybe during the discussions at the end of the sessions, I can bring up a couple that relate and see how you yourself have dealt with those kinds of challenges. All right. Our time is practically, well, our time is passed up. I did want us to talk for 2 seconds just to hear from you on what you thought of what you've learned so far, any challenges that you've had, and so on. And if you can share something, maybe a thought or whatever it is in 30 seconds or less, we can have a lot of persons share their thoughts in the next 3 minutes. In the meantime, I'm going to launch a quick poll just to get some feedback from you on this session to let me know what you think. And if you want to share something right now, please, okay, what am I doing here? If you want to share something, please raise your hand and we will unmute you so that you can share. Okay, in the meantime, I am launching a quick poll here, but I'm also looking for hands. Are you just stunned into silence? Okay, I see one hand, Ron Alexis. Okay, go ahead. You should be able to unmute now.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I just want to say that one of the points that you made, which really stood out to me, was when you said that we should allow students opportunities to express their thoughts in different ways, rather than just sticking to writing text. And that stood out to me basically because I've recently learned about UDL, Universal Design for Learning, which really speaks to allowing students to express, to engage, and for information to be represented in various ways so that all students feel a level of success and they feel comfortable in the learning environment. So that point really stood out to me.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'm glad to hear it. And as your colleague has mentioned, UDL, you should really look into that because it really gives you a wonderful perspective on how to plan. And there's something called backwards design. It's related. Just to look at ways that you can vary how you plan for instruction so that all of your students are catered for. And perhaps we can touch a bit on it when we're looking at differentiating and accommodating all types of writers. Any other comments? Anything else you want to share? All right, so I will just give you a quick review, preview of what our next session will be like on Wednesday. We're going to be looking at the writing workshop or the writers workshop. What exactly is it? What's the format? What are some benefits and challenges? And perhaps by then someone will reach out and say, I've tried this and I'd like to share my experience. All right. Thank you very, very much for attending. You've given me a lot of extra minutes. Instead of 40 minutes, we went to 55 minutes. But thank you very much for attending. Once you're done with the poll, you can feel free to exit the session. And I am really looking forward to seeing you on Wednesday. You are most welcome. And I'm sure you got some great ideas in the chat as well. Thank you, folks. Have a good evening. You should be seeing the poll. If you're not seeing the poll, I'm not sure. Just look at the bottom of the screen and see if there's a poll option